On October the 7th last year, ordinary Israeli civilians were the victims of the most extraordinary savagery. Hamas terrorists killed young people at a music festival, often in the most gruesome ways. Families were slaughtered in suburban homes. By any civilized moral standards, there ought to be overwhelming sympathy for a country subjected to that kind of savagery. Instead, throughout the Western world, we've witnessed endless anti-Israeli protests. Why? Part of the reason is demographics. For example, in Britain, in 2001, there were only 1.5 million Muslims. Today there are some 4 million. That's not to say that every or even most British Muslims are anti-Israel. But it does explain or help explain the scale and size of some of the recent protests we've seen in places like London. So too on American university campuses. There have been frequent anti-Israel student protests, often at supposedly elite universities. It's perhaps not a coincidence that there's also been a rapid rise in the number of students from Middle Eastern backgrounds at those sorts of universities too. Again, not every student who's anti-Israel is going to have a Middle Eastern background, but the reservoir of potential anti-Israel students is larger than it was at American universities before. The rise of anti-Israel sentiment in the West clearly can't be just about demographics, however. Many, if not most, of those protesting against Israel aren't people with a Middle Eastern background, but they're those on the political left. Why then do those on the left have such animus towards Israel? Why do they seem to suspend ordinary moral standards whenever Israel's involved? When it comes to Ukraine, for example, those on the political left, correctly in my view, see Ukraine as a brave country, rightfully taking a stand against a vastly bigger, aggressive bully. So why don't they see Israel that way? Israel wasn't just attacked on October the 7th. From the Six-Day War to the Yom Kippur War, Israel has been on the receiving end of relentless aggression. Israel, a country smaller than the state of Vermont, is surrounded by larger foes intent on destroying her and eradicating her people, as Hamas tried to do only a few months ago. Progressive opinion in America and Britain is of the view that the government of Ukraine mustn't come to terms with Russia. They mustn't seek some sort of accommodation with Russia. So why do progressives demand that Israel call a ceasefire? London, Washington and Berlin are full of leaders who want to supply Ukraine with weapons, rightfully, in my view. But then why do they demand that Europe and America stop giving Israel the tools to defend herself? Again, it's double standards. The last time there was unequivocal support for Israel in the West was at the time of the Entebbe raid back in 1976. I remember the morning of the Entebbe raid very well. A young child at the time, I happened to be living close by to Entebbe in Kampala. When Israel rescued those hostages from Entebbe, there was rejoicing across the political spectrum. Today, when Israel attempts to rescue her hostages in Gaza, she's treated by many media outlets with scorn. Look at how posters of Israeli hostages held in Gaza have been torn down in cities throughout America and Europe. As my friend Douglas Murray has pointed out, when a cat or dog goes missing in London or Paris or New York or wherever, people will often put up a poster about their missing pet. If we saw someone taking down a poster about a missing pet, we would be offended. We'd know that it was wrong. It's not something you do. Where's the outrage against those removing posters of the Bibas kids? One reason that Israel is held to a different standard is, I'm afraid to say, anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a famously shape-shifting virus. At one time, Jews were hated for their religion, then for their race. Today, it seems to me, it's their nation that they're hated for. Israel is loathed by many progressives because Israel as a country embodies the very notion of national self-determination. For many centuries, Jewish families at Passover would toast one another with the phrase, "next year in Jerusalem." And then in 1948, almost miraculously, it came true. National self-determination offends elite opinion formers. They revere instead the idea of supranationalism. Progressives venerate the UN, the ICC, the EU. Progressives prefer laws made by international treaty over those passed by elected national legislatures. Progressives prefer fealty to rules made by the global community over any obligations to an actual community. Israel's success offends the left, not only because she's a nation state, but because she demonstrates the success of Western society, of the Western way. If all cultures were of equal worth, why does a small state that you could fit inside Vermont produce so much enterprise and innovation? If there's an equivalence between cultures, why has post-1948 Israel had such success amid a sea of Middle Eastern failure and autocracy? Those that loathe Israel don't just hate the Jewish nation state. They despise all nation states, including another phenomenally successful republic started not in 1948, but in 1776. If those that hate Israel merely hated Israel, why do they burn the US flag? America and the Western way of life is their intended target. Whether we like it or not, those of us that love America, who see Western culture as what it is, the sublime human achievement, have no choice but to side with and support Israel against those who wish to destroy us all. Those that hate Israel hate us too.